Welcome to iTTV for Form 3 Science. Today's lesson, transport of oxygen in the human body. Throughout this chapter on respiration, we have so far investigated the whole idea of how we get oxygen into our body and how the oxygen enters into our bloodstream. We've had a look at the passageway of air, nasal cavity, trachea, bronchus, bronchiole, alveolus. We've had a look at the alveolus and its design, folded, moisture, the walls are 1 cell thick, all of which help the oxygen move into the blood much faster. We've had a look at the breathing mechanism of inhalation and exhalation. So today what we want to do is we want to have a look at oxygen itself, how it's transported from the lungs and how it ultimately gets to the cells. Oxygen is carried by the blood. I think we all know that the oxygen is carried by the blood, but inside the blood there are a special type of cell called the red blood cell. And it's this red blood cell that actually carries the oxygen for us. You would have learned back in Form 1 about the special adaptations of the red blood cell. Just to remind you a bit about it, the red blood cell has no nucleus. It is the only cell that has no nucleus. The reason it doesn't have a nucleus is because, well, A, it doesn't need to do any other activity except for carry oxygen, and B, by removing the nucleus, there's more area to carry oxygen. Also, the shape of the red blood cell is quite important. You need to remember it has this unique biconcave shape, or sometimes what we refer to as the donut shape. This system is known as the blood circulatory system. So what we're referring to is the system that carries the blood around our body for us. The blood circulatory system is basically composed of our arteries, veins, and capillaries, and the main pump, which is the heart, that pumps the blood through these blood vessels around our body. Capillaries carry the blood to the alveoli. In the alveoli, oxygen is taken in and carbon dioxide removed. In order to understand this process of gas exchange between the alveoli and the blood capillary in a bit more detail, let's go to the board up here and draw ourselves a diagram and then work our way through the diagram and look at it in more specific details. So the first thing that we need to draw is obviously the alveoli. So we come in through an alveoli like this. Remember, the alveoli is folded like so. Let's also put ourselves or draw ourselves a blood capillary over here, like so. Let's label these two main things. This is our alveolus, and over here, this is our blood capillary. So inside here is where the main gases are. Coming in here, we'll use red, is our oxygen, okay? And inside this, which is our blood capillary, we have our red blood cells, which I'll draw like this. Now the capillary is so small that actually the blood cells have to travel one at a time, which is quite useful for us in terms of gas exchange. Okay, I'll just label this red blood cell. Okay, so those are our main parts. Now what we've said is that the oxygen is going to be taken into the blood and the carbon dioxide is going to move back into the alveoli. The transport of oxygen involves the following processes. A, the diffusion of oxygen from the alveoli into blood capillaries. So the first step is we need to get the oxygen from here into here. Now there's a lot of oxygen here. There is almost no oxygen here. So this is high concentration and low concentration. So what happens here is the oxygen diffuses in here and combines with the red blood cells. Now remember, at the same time, any carbon dioxide, so I'm using the symbol here for carbon dioxide, which is CO2, and we'll also use the symbol for oxygen, which is O2. This means that I don't have to write these words too many times. Now the carbon dioxide is in high concentration inside the blood, and there's less carbon dioxide inside the alveoli. So the carbon dioxide diffuses in the opposite direction and moves back into the alveoli. So oxygen enters into the blood, carbon dioxide enters back into the alveoli, both processes by diffusion. So that's the first step, the diffusion of oxygen from the alveoli into the blood capillaries. The second step, the transport of oxygen by red blood cells. So we need to go back to the board now for the second step. So the oxygen now has come in and is joined into our red blood cells. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to draw a second diagram over here, and this one is a bit simpler and it's showing a bit more of the body. We'll start by drawing our lung and our lung over here. So these are our lungs. Whoops. Lungs, okay? The two lungs up here. Now, from our lungs, blood carries oxygen and brings it back to our heart. It brings the oxygen to the heart. From the heart, blood comes out and goes to our body, like so. In the body, obviously here we are going to take this oxygen and use the oxygen up. From the body, blood that has no oxygen, what we call deoxygenated blood, will flow back to the heart, and from the heart, this blood will then go to the lungs. So you see how the process works. Blood with oxygen goes from the lungs to the heart. The heart pumps the oxygenated blood to the body. The body takes the oxygen, puts carbon dioxide back in the blood. The blood that has carbon dioxide, which we call deoxygenated blood, flows back to the heart. From the heart, it is pumped to the lungs, and the whole process is repeated, and we get gas exchange occurring. So, remember, first the oxygen diffuses into the blood. Secondly, the blood carries the oxygen on the red blood cells away from the lungs. C, the diffusion of oxygen from the blood capillaries into the cells. And this occurs at the body part. Once we've entered into the body, all the blood capillaries will surround the cells and then hand the oxygen over to the cells and take the carbon dioxide back to the lungs for us. Now that we've had a look at this basic idea of oxygen transport, let's have a look at a few questions on this topic. How does oxygen enter the blood capillary? So, remember, the oxygen is in high concentration in the alveolus, low concentration inside the capillary. There's a process where we move from high concentration to low concentration. Let's check the answer. By diffusion. So oxygen moves into the blood capillary by diffusion. Let's try another question. What system carries the oxygen to the rest of the body? So remember, here we're looking at a system whereby blood is transported around the body. What's the name of the system that transports blood? Let's have a look at the answer. The blood circulatory system. So oxygen is carried around to the rest of the body by the blood circulatory system. So now we understand how the oxygen gets into the blood, and we understand how the oxygen is then transferred from the lungs to the cells where it's needed for respiration. And also at the same time, if we think about it, we also sort of have an idea how carbon dioxide from the cells, the byproduct of respiration, is brought back to the lungs and then ultimately removed from our bodies. Remember, without the blood circulatory system, the oxygen would not be able to be carried everywhere. So it's very important that you help to maintain both the respiratory system and the blood circulatory system, because these two systems work hand in hand to actually transfer the oxygen around the body and to collect back the carbon dioxide for removing from the body. The concentration of oxygen in the alveoli is higher than the concentration of oxygen in the capillary. Now, this is really important to understand because you need to understand this process of diffusion. You know, diffusion is a beautiful process because it doesn't need any energy. By allowing a constant difference in the pressures or the concentrations of oxygen in the alveoli and in the blood, we can allow diffusion, or we make diffusion occur, thereby saving energy because we don't need to use energy to move the oxygen into the blood. So remember, the alveoli always has high concentration of oxygen, the blood capillary always a low concentration of oxygen. The difference in oxygen concentration in these two parts causes a diffusion of the gas through the thin, moist walls of the alveoli and capillary. So because you have a high concentration, low concentration, the oxygen gas just moves from high concentration to low concentration and ends up in the blood. At the same time, always remember, carbon dioxide is doing the reverse. In the blood, carbon dioxide is high concentration, in the alveoli, low concentration. And basically, the carbon dioxide is going to move back into the alveoli. You should know the percentages of concentration of the two gases in both the alveoli and the blood. Make a table for yourself. Write down oxygen in the alveoli, oxygen in the blood, carbon dioxide in the alveoli, carbon dioxide in the blood. We've done these tables before, so please try to create a table and put in their values. These type of values can come out in the examinations. The process is reversed for carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide diffuses from the blood capillaries into the alveolus. So remember what I said, try to create that table, put in the values. By putting in the values, you'll get a numerical value, numbers that show you the difference between their concentrations. In the alveolus, oxygen is roughly about 21%. In the blood, oxygen is about 16%. So you can see that there is a difference in the numbers, 21 to 16. Carbon dioxide, conversely, in the blood is roughly 4%, and inside the alveoli, it's only 0.04%. That's almost 100 times different. So you can understand how the carbon dioxide is going to diffuse across. Just for the sake of your memory, let's put these numbers down in our diagram so that later on you can extract the information when you create your table for yourself. So, like we were saying, the oxygen inside the alveoli, this one is roughly 21%. But oxygen inside the blood, so we'll write an O2 over here, this one is roughly 16%. So you see the difference, and you can understand why diffusion occurs from high to low. With respect to the carbon dioxide, it's slightly different. The carbon dioxide here is roughly 4%. Inside here, the carbon dioxide is roughly 0.04. So because it's 0.04, I'll just rub this off because it's a bit untidy, 0.04. Because this is 0.04 and this is 4, there's 100 times difference between the two. So you can understand how the carbon dioxide is diffusing from very high concentration to very low concentration. Please remember these concentrations, and like I said, try to create a box for yourself, a table, put these values in, and then try to talk about it or write about it by using these concentration values and the idea of diffusion. It will help you remember this process. The red blood cells in human blood contain a special respiratory pigment called hemoglobin, which is red in color. So our red blood cells have this thing called hemoglobin. It's a very complex protein that's attached to it. The function of hemoglobin is to carry the oxygen. As you'll see in a coming slide, the oxygen joins to this hemoglobin to form a complex that we call oxyhemoglobin. Oxyhemoglobin is a very stable pigment or complex molecule, and it allows itself to carry the oxygen without accidentally losing or dropping the oxygen along the way. Oxygen combines easily with hemoglobin to form oxyhemoglobin. So the oxygen combines with hemoglobin to form oxyhemoglobin. We have an equation for this that you need to remember. Oxygen plus hemoglobin produces oxyhemoglobin. Oxyhemoglobin is bright red color. Now this is quite important to know. Blood that has no oxygen is a slightly dark red color. Blood that contains oxygen is a bright red color due to the presence of oxyhemoglobin. You do need to know the difference in the colors, because a typical question could be something like where they say, if it's dark red, does it contain oxygen? If it's bright red, does it contain oxygen? So you need to know the relationship between the presence of oxygen and the color of the blood. Now that we've had a look at oxyhemoglobin and also the process of diffusion, let's try a few questions on what we've just done. What is the name of the pigment in red blood cells? Remember, the red blood cells contain a specialized pigment that helps carry the oxygen with it. Can you remember the name of this pigment? Let's check the answer. Hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is the name of the pigment in red blood cells. Let's try another question. What is bright red color? Remember, we were talking about it. If your blood is dark red, it means there's no oxygen. If it's bright red, it means there's oxygen. The oxygen is connected to the hemoglobin and it forms a special complex molecule. Do you remember the name of the molecule? Let's check the answer. Oxyhemoglobin. So oxyhemoglobin is a bright red color. So remember what we've done in this chapter. We've had a look at how oxygen enters into the bloodstream by diffusion, and conversely carbon dioxide diffuses back into the alveolus. We've had a look at how oxygen binds onto hemoglobin to form oxyhemoglobin, and we've also realized the color differences between blood with oxygen and blood without oxygen. That's all the time we have for this lesson. Thank you very much for watching iTTV.